Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast featuring tech legend Jay Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.
Hello, stranger.
Hello, Dr. Marie. Long time no see. So last night, anything piqued your interest from all those questions we got?
Oh, gosh. I do have to laugh about it.
What was the last question?
Oh, it's all about everything neurotherapy, right? The last question. Where do you get educated? What equipment? Who's arguing who and what?
What was your take on that? Because the first question was, what does it take to be a tech, a neurofeedback technician?
Yeah.
I thought it was valid. What was your take on it? How did you answer that?
Well, all good. I mean, the problem is Jay is in the room, and I mean that in the most complimentary, wonderful way. You know, Jay jokes about his history. But you know, somebody with the knowledge, the genius of Jay, you know, just cannot be compared to a technician per se. And that's also where I started talking about the people who work here. We have 2 neurotechnicians who have stayed under that label. One I think is 18 years and the other is 23. There are technicians and there are technicians. So there are these things called experience and grandmothering and grandfathering in. But you know, I always like to say a weekend workshop and buying a piece of equipment does not a neurotherapist make. But I mean, we run around in circles in here. You know, what are you doing? Who are you working with? How complex are your cases? You know, neurotherapy is not a protected name or a protected discipline. Anybody can call themselves a neurotherapist. And like, how many pieces of equipment do you know of? And how many are FDA or Health Canada or Europe health approved versus the wellness products? You know, where's our reliability, our validity? It's, you know, this is our sponsor, the Depends, right? You know, we're not we're not talking about the same thing all the time, and I think that's so confusing for newbies. But also amongst ourselves, we kind of have to clarify, who we're working with and how we're working under what umbrella of practice as well. You know, I don't have any issue with somebody, you know, doing something very, very straightforward, not saying they're practicing in mental health or medicine. But, you know, once you cross a little bridge, you got to be careful.
The neurofeedback technicians, the person you've had over 2 decades, is there any continuing education requirement? And if it's not a regulation, which I know it's not, but do you say, hey, you know, we have these conferences to go to? Because you go to a ton of stuff.
Yeah, well, as I said, I'm off to the Biofeedback Federation of Europe in 2 days. And yeah, that's where, you know, from newbies all the way up to extremely experienced people. And, you know, the extremely experienced people are doing interesting things. So, I mean, if you've been in this practice for 30 years, you know, we follow our colleagues. We don't necessarily practice in the same way they do, but we follow each other. We scaffold on each other's knowledge, which is absolutely fantastic. We have, you know, different ways of approaching things. I know everybody's probably very familiar that I'm primarily an amplitude and ratio practitioner. And I work a lot with the numerical conversions as well as the raw signal. I'm not a huge fan of pictorial representation because I can't tell purely from pictorial representation if something isn't right with the data collection. I can't tell whether it's an artifact or whether it's something true once we move to the picture. So that's my big rationale. But yeah, you know, the meetings and the technicians. So technicians can have their BCIA certification. There is now a neurotechnical a certification there. I would say anybody who wants to enter, please get that. But, you know, individuals who've been working in this forever, you know, some people don't have that. I'm going to loop back. I think the newbies should. But if we look at, you know, my folks, I mean, I have incredible trust in their knowledge. I mean, we've been working side by side for over 20 years. So, I mean, the knowledge that they have is phenomenal. Now, legally, ethically, under practice regulations, they have to check everything with me. Everything they do is supervised by myself, etc. You know, if there's an issue, I'm the one that's hung, not them. You know.
Well,
But
in the States, you have to have a licensed person
yeah.
to oversee in order to get insurance. That's the big one.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that makes sense. But one of my issues up here, for example, that there are protocols that, again, that people have been applying with variations as the science and the art advances. But I mean, they've been doing this for eons. And anything that I can train my staff to do as well as I can do for almost half the cost, I do. But for some insurance companies, no, they want me to do it. And that I think is an absolute waste. It's kind of like having a dental surgeon clean somebody's teeth. Now, there's nothing wrong with the cleaning of the teeth, but why do you pay a dental surgeon's rate for the cleaning of the teeth? And I think that's where the insurance companies have to figure things out. On the other hand, you sure as heck do not want a dental hygienist doing certain forms of dental surgery. So this is, you know, we have to be really careful about the assumptions of bidirectionality. It's not bidirectional, it's unidirectional. And that's what irks me. And that's, again, where you can really get me on my soapbox, is when people assume that it's bidirectional. It's not. But if, you know, there's certain levels of our practice that can be taught extremely efficiently, and the service can be provided extremely affordably if we follow the dentistry model, and the insurance companies accept that. But we have to be organized. And I repeat, it's not bidirectional.
So if you're going to bring on a new tech, I
Mhm.
mean, the Swingle process, I mean,
Yeah.
that's proprietary, you know, family business for a while. But if you're going to bring, for somebody that's just getting into business, let's just say you're a licensed person, you know what? I saw this neurofeedback. There could be an end game in mental health. I want to
Yeah.
bring on, I'm going to learn it myself. That's the first thing. You have to know it yourself in and out
Mhm.
before you can train somebody else. But do you send somebody to a course to learn first, or what is the course, or how long do you want them to learn before they come in back into the office?
Yeah, I mean, well, the good and the bad of being practicing neurotherapy for 30 years is things have changed. You know, we were literally one of the first 3 clinics in Canada, and I think Andrew even the other day said we were like the largest in all of North America, you know, for years and years and years. So nobody knew anything when they first came to work for us. So we trained everybody in-house, but we were looking for complementary competence. So obviously, you know, a psychologist would be wonderful. But in terms of our quote unquote neurotechnical staff, or what we would call neurotechnicians, nurses, physiotherapists, educational specialists. So any complementary knowledge. So for example, an educational specialist would be phenomenal for working with ADHD. Physiotherapy, individuals working with stroke. So you have certain forms of paralysis, for example. Nurse is kind of automatic. I don't even think I have to define that one. But the complementary practice, and we train them all in-house. Now we love it if somebody comes in with their BCIA. And then we'll train them up in the specifics of our methods. That's a really, really good, good complement. So that's essentially what we do here. We have some people who essentially do both. They work on their BCIA while they work with us. We ask for a limited commitment, meaning if we're going to train you up in our methods, that you essentially sign on the dotted line that you're going to work with us for a certain amount of time. I think this is, people have heard me talk about this before. It's a bee in my bonnet, to use a really, really old-fashioned term. You know, it costs a lot of money to train somebody up in our methods. And, you know, we literally pay our staff to pay the person, and that's not a clinical hour, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, people really have to understand that if they're going to train under people who aren't just training from a textbook, it's got to be a two-way street.
Well, a lot of the Patreon supporters of the show have training businesses, and they're usually a little bit less than a couple grand and about a week's worth of time. You go on site somewhere and do it. But I went through it twice when Stens was around. John Anderson I worked with him, and part of their deal was you could retake the class as many times as you want until until you felt like you got it, because it's really like trying to get a sip of water from a fire hose. But nothing beats that hands-on part of it, because the hardest part is making sure the placements of the sensors on the head and getting a good signal. That's critical. At least that's what I saw or trying to teach. What is the hardest thing that you think a new tech has to learn when they come on board?
That's a good question, and it's not an easy one, because, you know, there's obviously the knowledge of the physiology, the knowledge of the brain waves, how the brain works. Some of the, you know, getting the generalized concepts can be hard to wrap one's head around. You know, you have to know electrical theory, anatomy. I mean, it's just this amazing combination of things. And then, of course, the technology. Yeah, and then, of course, the technology. So once you get your handle on the electricity and the physiology, and the anatomy, then there's the technology. So it's an incredibly steep learning curve. And then, of course, you know, some of the solid theory, the emergent theory, all of that combining. So I say if you really want to get into this, you have to be extremely committed to learning, and then bedside manner, so to speak. You need individuals who are in this for the right reason, who really care about individuals' well-being. Whether you're working with the munchkins, you know, in terms of some of their educational deficits or difficulties learning. Sometimes it's not a deficit at all. It's simply a missed learning phase that can grow and grow into a major educational complexity. The behavioral components, working with family dynamics. And then, of course, we have, you know, shall we say, stronger issues with mental health and mental illness. So somebody who is in a true depression, you know, garden variety depression is very, very easy to work with, okay? But true depression, wherein you have major issues with motivation, that different can of beans, very different can of beans. Yeah.
The bedside manner thing, from what I remember, the biggest thing was before you touch somebody, you got to tell them what you're going to do. I mean, when gender's coming to play, here's Jay. He's like, "Hey, man."
He's coming to play. Yeah. Hello,
Jay's
Jay.
like, "What?" Jay's like, "Pete, what the hell are you doing?"
Yeah.
Jay, we're talking while you're getting reconfigured. We're talking about bringing on a new neurofeedback tech. The things that have to go into play to train them up, get them going. We brought it up because of the Q&A last night. It was a big thing, and I was asking Dr. Marie what she does in her practice when she brings somebody on board. And a couple of things that came up that Dr. Marie just brought up was you really got to know your electricity.
You know,
waves are actually electrical. You know, people think
when you try to pass an EEG tech exam, you have to know circuitry as well. They'll give you a circuit and a couple of values, and they'll ask you what the current in the circuit is and things. So, there you need to know what you're doing. Polarity, frequencies, electrical safety, which is something a
Yeah.
lot of people don't really pay close attention to. But there's a lot of what's done in the field that doesn't necessarily uh, comport to medical EEG standards. In a medical EEG, you demonstrate the calibrations for 40 seconds clear before you do any EEG itself. And, you know, I've I see EEGs from lots and lots of people. There's only a handful of people that do full medical compliant EEGs. So, the training for the field could also stand a little bit of a buff up. But I'm a tech, and I see those technical details, and like somebody correcting your grammar. you know, it's really not very well appreciated. Well, you really should do calibrations at the beginning of your test, and they call the manufacturer and say, "I need to calibrate my amp." No, no, you don't need to calibrate your amp. Your amp is calibrated. There's you need to demonstrate your calibrations on the file that you're recording, and it's not that you need to recalibrate your instrument. Although once you run your cals, you'll find out whether you need to recalibrate your instrument or not. So
Can I
you
just
know,
run with your grammar example? Because I think it's a really, really good one. Okay. You know, to what extent do we have to dot our I's, cross our T's, make sure there's a period and a cap? Okay. So perfect, publishable, etc., versus communicating. Okay. So one is the ability to communicate, the other is the perfection. But I think where many of us take issue is when the language, it's like babble, it's garbage, you can't communicate. And that's also where you can potentially do damage.
yeah,
So I love that example. There's grammar and then there's grammar.
yeah.
Is it the past tense or the present tense, or the future? Like, where are you going with your brain?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the terminology in the field is a little soft in comparison to a medical EG
Yeah.
group. People talk about a delta spike. What? A burst of delta, maybe, or a
An
paroxysm of
airplane?
delta, or something. But a spike is very, very brief, 20 to 60 milliseconds in duration, and a delta is way slow,
Yeah.
depending upon the definition, below 3.5 or 4 usually.
Can't spike a hill, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. We were also talking about bedside manner. And I think that that's one that's really, really important in
yeah,
terms of, we started, Jay was talking about, Pete was talking about touching individuals. So one, of course, is permission to touch. But the other thing I think is very, very important to center your intentionality, when you're working with individuals.
yeah.
Yeah. And, there are a couple of professions where I think you have it or you don't have it. And I question whether it can actually be taught. Teacher is one, and I think doctor is definitely another. I mean, if you have to teach presence and you have to teach empathy, then you got a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
Well, you have to inspect what you expect, right? Because what I'm just going over. I was only in it for 3 years. My sister's a neuropsychologist. She got me into it. I did it. COVID, things got shut down, and then that's where this podcast came from. So I have limited experience. So bear with me. But what I noticed was where I didn't do a good enough job on was making sure overseeing the tech to make sure the stuff is clean. Everything is in order,
Yeah.
because if you got that saline paste all over, you don't clean it up, you don't get a good signal, right?
Yeah, you can smear between electrodes, and you can also get paste onto the tips of things that you stick into your amp and ruin your amp. So, the cleanliness, a tech has everything laid out carefully that they're going to use. It's not a scramble to find stuff. That
Well,
you
let's
you
talk
can
about
usually,
hygiene though too. I mean
yeah,
that's a medical hygiene.
yeah,
One of the things our staff, we provide gloves. It's up to them whether they glove or not. But if you have any little thing on any little cuticle damage, we wear finger condoms or finger prophylactics all the time, not necessarily the full gloves. But even clients can have a little pimple on their head. Now, what's the chance of transmission? Very, very small, but it's there.
yeah.
Does everybody, put on their form whether they're Hep C positive or whether they're HIV positive? So, yeah. And you have to really make sure your electrodes are
Yeah.
sterilized. And I guarantee you, if you're having issues with your paste crusting, you are not cleaning up your
Yeah.
stuff.
The
And we're
number, the,
using these things on different heads all the time too.
yeah,
So,
the number of people that sterilize the cap in between uses, as opposed to just cleaning it.
mhm.
You know, Scrubbing it out and hanging it up to dry doesn't necessarily sterilize it.
Yeah.
And there's, glutaldehyde, which is the stinky, nasty shit that you have to soak it in, and then you have to aerate it for 24 hours, preferably outdoors. I mean, the stuff is horrible. If you don't have an exhaust fan for a hood, exhaust hood area to take the fumes out, you'll
Mhm.
smell like the respiratory care department in a hospital. Go in there, you smell glutaldehyde. They use it to sterilize all sorts of stuff. So,
Jay, how did
yeah,
you do it? Like, uh, we would run it underneath lukewarm water, uh, go through it was a 19 channel, so the 19 sensors, and then we would put it over a dummy head with a blow dryer in it, and then when it was dry, we would put it in a UV chamber. Do you
you
need to
know,
do all that, or
all that's fine and dandy. The heat that you applied to dry it may, in fact, shorten the life of the cap. It's spandex. It's a fine washable. you know, how many times do you boil one of those and still wear it? So, um, you know, um, different caps have different issues, and spandex is subject to heat problems. You
We, I
can't
should
put
take a
it in an
picture here.
autoclave and bring it out as a useful item, other than maybe to form it into an ashtray. What you do in pottery when you make something that doesn't work, you make a groove in it and call it an ashtray. So
Yeah, it's expensive. I mean, we go through caps very, very quickly for all of those reasons. But for anybody out there, our secret is a tooth water pick to
yeah,
clear out that
yeah,
it changes everything. And if you do that really, really quick, you do not wait 2 minutes after you've applied the cap. Just get in there really, really quick. Yeah. We have
and
a shower in here. It's
no
kind of
matter
fun. We
what
have a
you
coat rack.
do,
Sorry.
no matter what you do while they're still wet, once
Yeah.
they're dry, you have to turn them inside out and look. You could have missed one,
Yeah.
and it's easy. I mean, there's 19 of those little suckers in there, and you're inside out and you're turning it around and you can lose one. So look inside. And if you see, well, there's different metals. If you have silver chloride pellets, this doesn't apply. But if it's a tin, which is most of the caps are just a tin disc, you should see a shiny tin disc. If you look in and it looks gray, it's got a thin film of stuff on it. And it'll take time to hydrate that thin film. During that time, your impedances are going to look high. You might be scraping the skin um, kind of superstitiously. Well, the thin film hydrates and gets you better impedance, but you can also end up seeing it build up. And I have seen people who wash the caps out kind of best they can in under the faucet and still end
we
up with buildup over time.
Jay, we had a tech. we had techs that would say, I just can't get a signal in, let's just say CZ. No matter what we do, I just got a bad signal on it. Then my sister would go in and look at the cap and look at it, and it's dirty. You couldn't see
Yeah,
the dirt, but it was, it was there.
yeah, and you've got high impedance at one electrode and not at another. You're going to pick up artifact because of the difference. Your common mode rejection requires balance between the impedances to work properly, and if you don't have common mode rejection, you're picking up field effects and in all sorts of 60 hertz and or 50, depending upon where you are.
Jay, what do you think? We asked this question earlier. What do you think is the hardest thing for a new tech to pick up when they come on the job?
It's the interpersonal relationship hierarchy is something that you end up having to learn. And as a tech, you have to have an upper boundary on what you can do. The rest of it is the doctor's responsibility or the therapist's responsibility.
So what you communicate to the client, you let Dr. Marie communicate to the client. You just get the data,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. You can be friendly and conversant during the hookup, but and describe what you're doing, but you don't do any interpretation of anything or uh, try to tell them what the study could show or something such as that. It's just you're a tech and you hand off to people with proper credentials the responsibility to talk about those things.
Very
It
good
shouldn't
point.
mean that you don't try to learn all of
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
As the more you learn, the more valuable you be. But you need to know when and how to communicate. And with clients, there's an upper limit. As a tech, you've got a hard stop, and that's it's appropriate. There's a reason because of liability. As a tech, you don't want to end up making a statement that's not correct and having
But
a
also
patient get
it can
all
be
upset.
really, really difficult because clients will consistently ask the technicians and they'll push and push and push. And as Jay was saying, that the most valuable tech is the one who knows all the answers. Um, but we'll kind of bring that up and forward to the attending psychologist or MD or what have you. But yeah, to have that knowledge, but do know the clients will push and push and push for that, and that's a really, really hard line to dance over.
And a huge critical one is HIPAA. You want to talk about that, Dr. Marie?
Yeah, play by the rules. You know, privacy is huge. And that's a major, major issue in the digital age. I mean, I don't know, call me a dinosaur. I see it as a compliment at this point. But one of the things that we are so cautious about here is where we store our data, where we don't store our data. Your data does not leave our clinic, period. We don't store things on the cloud, because who owns the cloud? What country? A lot of things, depending on how you store things electronically, a lot of Canadian things are stored in the US. That could be an issue now. But you just really to ensure that information is protected. We were talking actually yesterday about getting rid of the stigmas, whether it's depression or anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. But, on a job application, do you want, have you ever experienced depression or anxiety? You don't want your records public. You don't want things easily retrievable. I don't know how that works, Jay, in terms of, the wellness centers. I know there's an issue with the wellness products collecting all kinds of medical information, but not having any obligation to store it according to HIPAA or in Canada, HIPAA.
Well, I'm pretty cautious with what data goes out.
Yeah, yeah,
At this point, I don't even let them do testing. So uh,
yeah.
this guy got up for the morning here. He was on my lap here.
We miss you, Sky. Dr. Marie, you brought up backing stuff up, and that was an issue too because you're like, hey man, where'd the EDF files go? I got a different layout of the laptop, or the tech deleted something. You got any suggestions how to get through those faux pas?
Unfortunately, no. And this is where we all have to be honest. Every once in a while, poof, there's nothing more frustrating than collecting a whole data set, and it's like, where the heck did it go? Yeah, I don't have any more talent than anybody else when technology decides to not be your friend for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Jay, but
Yeah. Well, as a tech, you end up with procedures,
yeah.
and the procedures try to avoid the mistakes of clicking on something that pitches the file. And you go through step by step by step procedurally, and that procedural memory ends up saving you from making mistakes and or omitting something. So the calibrations, the checking various montages, testing your impedances, the step by step by step by step. If you do it right, the outcome is really quite nice, even with a fairly difficult client. And if you don't do it well, you can get a horrible recording on somebody who's totally compliant. So
And I do not mind sharing my procedural memory. This is not where my forte lies. So I really rely on the magnificent staff here. So
Like, what would be the three things that if you're going to be a good tech, what do you have to get down strong?
the electronics of it have to be foundational knowledge, and you can get that from lots of free online coursework through ASET, ASET, the American Society of Electroneurodiagnostic Technologists. They certify for EEG, ERP, nerve conduction velocities, polysomnography, interoperative monitoring, all sorts of very fancy testing that people do. And they have what they can do to bring people into the field. So they've got a lot of good free educational material. BCIA, you're going to be learning about biofeedback equipment and neurofeedback equipment. So BCIA has practice tests and reading lists and things like that for you to go over. You need to educate yourself to the extent that you can. And I think some of it is best learned kind of looking over the shoulder of somebody doing it who's pointing out what they're doing. And that one-on-one learning can now be done in groups online, watching an EEG being reviewed. I would suggest if you're going to be doing EEGs that you learn as much as you can about the EEG itself. And there are books, The Art of Artifacting, I can mention. I'm an author, but I make absolutely nothing of it. As soon as we wrote it, we gave it as a fundraiser to the society. And it's had a whole bunch of different, I think maybe 6, 7 different printings.
do you want my top three, Pete?
Go ahead, Dr.
No, I mean, for me, it's very, very simple. As Jay was saying, the technical knowledge, okay, everything we've already outlined. What I refer to as the bedside manner, okay, and the third one is curiosity.
I think listening to your boss is a big skill.
I agree. I definitely.
I mean, I think my opinion of limited knowledge of a few years doing it is your job is to make sure the client is being taken care of, that they're in a clean environment, that you're getting clean data, and the relationship is clean. It's not because what I've seen is techs get too personal with their people, or they text off hours and stuff like that. Then you run into the HIPAA issues. Just get me good data and make sure the client is taken care of. Getting feedback from the client is tough. The biggest feedback you get from a client is they go away, you never see them again. That's not the feedback that we want.
No.
But Dr. Marie or Jay, like, how would you verify that the tech is doing their job? One way is to look at the raw data and say, okay, we've got a good clean signal. But how do you make sure that the tech is giving good customer service to the client that comes in?
Well, we have data on the technician. We have data on the session. They provide screenshots and also the numerical data. Like every single client, we get our pre-post. So there's a baseline, eyes open, eyes closed. Then we do the protocol. We get the numbers on the protocol, and then we have our end data. We also have a nice little section where the neurotechnician asks how they're doing, any type of updates, anything you want myself to know. And then it gets flagged, whether I have to come in at that moment or the next appointment. And all of that is reviewed by myself. So it's a very, very tight system. So we have the interpersonal component, and we have the checking in, we have the data, we have the progress notes, all of that, and I sign off on everything. They also know when they just press that pause button and say, "Excuse me, I need to check with something," and the neurotechnicians will call each other in. Hey, does this look okay? Yes, all right. And, the clients really, really appreciate that. Oh, by the way, yeah, be humble. That's a huge one. There is no such thing as a stupid question. There is no such thing as a bad pause. If something doesn't look quite right, or you're curious as to what something is, pause and speak with a colleague, and a colleague could be another technician, senior technician, let me qualify, the technical staff who can check the signal or whatnot, like, hey, this looks a bit wonky, or the attending physician or psychologist.
In the States, you have to have a licensed person there overseeing things, because you never know if somebody's going to have an episode or something. A tech cannot handle an episode. You need the clinician there.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on if a licensed person wants to expand their practice to use cameras to oversee a session as the data's coming in, to supervise that way, or it just has to be live?
I mean, this is the new world. We're figuring all this out. I would say under some circumstances that's absolutely fine, but depending on who the client is, then it could also be malpractice, right? There's a whole linear answer to that. So guess what? The sponsor again. It depends.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're dealing with mental health. It's not just physical health, but I mean, you could even say that with a doctor. I mean, why go in when you
all the
have the
videos that you
sniffles?
shoot end up being part of their medical record too. So you're making a problem for yourself in some respects. So
Yeah.
Then how does it work when you're doing remote, Jay? A lot of people do 80% of their business remote, so that's through a camera. You have to keep all that.
All that has to be kept. You're going to have a recording of the session, and that includes any discussion, any observation of where the electrodes are placed, observations of what the equipment is set up like, what the thresholding and so forth is set at, and the monitoring of the session. So all of that's going to be recorded.
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying the show and want to help us keep it going, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support helps improve the content and brings on great guests and grow the show. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/NeuroNoodle. But hey, if supporting financially isn't in the cards right now, no worries. You can still help us out for free by liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode. It really makes a difference and helps more people find the show. If we've earned it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode.
And
again, we're dinosaurs here. I think for good reason. We know what works. I think we were one of the first clinics to have a remote program, and we were just spending so much time on the reliability of the equipment, tinkering here and there, and it just wasn't working. It was a waste of, we were either comping too much because something was wrong, or it was a waste of the client's money. Now, I'm going back a long time. Things have really, really advanced, but the decision that we have made to date is you have to be a client on the floor for a certain amount of time. And then if you move somewhere, we'll set you up with a really good setup. And then we'll work via camera, but it's, it's 100%, one-on-one. Now we have something coming down the pipeline, hopefully in a year or so. We have to get modern too. But in the meantime, this is a system where I know we are doing no harm first, do no harm before you can do well. Yeah, no, I'm a stickler for reliability, validity. No chances here. No chances here.
So in the early 1970s, they invented the ability to transmit EEGs over voice-grade telephone lines.
Mm-hmm.
And the receiving center had 400 hospitals. So we were telemedicine before there was the term telemedicine.
Wow.
And that's how I ended up with 500,000 EEGs by the early 1990s, is because there's 400 hospitals sending in. Now, luckily, not all of them chose to do something on the same day. They were all small town hospitals that didn't have their own neurologist. And if they wanted to have an EEG, this was the way they could do it. They could do it in-house instead of sticking the patient in an ambulance and sending them to another facility, or helicoptering them to another facility to get an EEG. So we provided EEG services to small towns all over. So how many neurologists are going to hang out in Eagle Pass, Texas, So
never been. Jay, Dr. Marie, where did this topic come from? It came from our Q&A that we have every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central Time, 4 p.m. Pacific. Somebody asked, "Hey, what does it take to be a neurofeedback technician?" Well, we didn't have the time to go into it then, but we did here. We welcome everybody to join us every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central. And then, Jay, is anything going on in October in Suisun City?
Suisun is a busy little town in October, because people from all over the place are popping in here for 3 days of EEG discussions and coursework. And from the 8th to the 11th, we're busy taking over the yacht club and hanging out, doing EEG things. So the website and everything will be up soon enough to, and early bird discount goes until I think something like July or something. So there's plenty of time, and there's discounts for students, and there's the whole purpose of the meeting is twofold. Number one, I can't travel, so people come here. And secondly, we raise money for students. And last year it was over $10,000 to students. We just gave $2,000 to Mark Jones and his students doing the dry sensor comparison to wet sensor. They're 3D printing their own equipment and everything. So it's quite
That's
a project.
Crazy.
So yeah, and in a circumstance like that, a grant of a couple $1,000, hell, if you pay yourself for your time and you fill out applications and gather letters of support and stuff for a $2,000 grant, you just spent $1,000 of your damn time. And now if you got to do a report afterward to tell them what you did with it, you might as well not have taken the money. Mm-hmm. So our grants are angel grants. They're here, $2,000. We trust you can use this for something good in your project. Have fun with it. And we're not asking for, we expect the outcome that they've always gotten. This is a professor that teaches students, and this is a fabulous project. So why wouldn't you support it? And there are plenty of organizations that require applications. And again, they don't give you big grants, but they require applications. And at some point, you've got to be able to see something good and just say, "Hey, that's good here," And we've done some of that, as opposed to having some fancy set of hurdles that you got to jump over in order to get some money. So, and students are our future.
Yeah.
Neil Miller started this whole students are our future thing in our field. And his job back then in Yale was to take everything that had been learned as classically conditionable, pupil diameter, blood pressure, things that you could train, like Pavlov trained his dogs classically to salivate and things. Well, take a classically conditioned thing and train it operantly. So it's now part of the voluntary nervous system, not just an involuntary thing. Well, that upset the scientific community, and they basically said his data was a fraudulent data set because it was all muscle mediation of all of these things. Your blood pressure is going up and down because of some covert muscle tension or something. His student, Leo DeCara, took curare, paralyzed himself, and then demonstrated that he had control of his blood pressure, which had been trained. Now, try to get that through an IRB sometime, But he recognized that the students in our field are in a cross-disciplinary, transdisciplinary group, and you've got to foster that somehow. They're not. There's no course of study that leads to this. This is something that people will find, and it's in between psychology and physiology, psychophysiology, and it's a unique group, and they need to be fostered. So he set up the Biofeedback Research Society's foundation long time ago now. So.
Good man. And Dr. Marie, I've had a little bit of trouble sleeping lately. Can you recommend a good app?
Oh, do I ever? Shameless promotion here. SwingleSonic. We have a sleep app. And I don't mind sharing it. I used it last night myself. Yeah. But also a shout out for BFE. Actually presenting the latest data on the app at the scientific, also doing a workshop in Swingle clinical Q and brain driving methods, if anybody's going over to Europe. Yeah.
BFA has been a fabulous event over the years. I've done a lot of them. I got the European Educator of the Year award from them, and I'm thinking, well, I'm not European. But I was educating people in Europe, so okay,
That's where I met you. Gosh, I don't want to say how many years ago, but it was at a BFE meeting. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate everybody putting up.
They've always been fun.
Yeah.
They've always been fun.
I appreciate everybody putting up with the production this week. I've been on the road. I'd rather have lower production quality than no production quality. And then on behalf of the Atlantic Ocean, Jay, there's your Suisun City on the East Coast.
Well, it's on the wrong side.
Hey, and in politics too. Everybody, have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.